Dad's text appeared on my phone just before noon. Please don't come to your brother's engagement dinner. We've finalized the guest list and it's better if you stay away. I read it 3 times, hoping I had misunderstood. I hadn't. Outside my office window in Washington, D.C., the city moved as if nothing had happened. Sirens echoed in the distance. People hurried along the sidewalks, and sunlight reflected off the glass buildings. Meanwhile, my own father had erased me from one of the most important family celebrations with a single message. I didn't argue. I didn't call. I didn't beg for an explanation. I locked my phone, returned to the stack of files on my desk, and buried myself in work. Years of being treated like the outsider had taught me one thing: silence often reveals more than anger ever could. Still, the words lingered in my mind. It's better if you stay away. Better for whom? For my father, who always cared more about appearances than honesty? Or for the relatives who had spent years whispering that I was too ambitious after moving to Washington instead of staying close to home? By evening, I imagined the engagement dinner in full swing. Crystal glasses clinked together. Laughter filled the room. Family photos were being taken without me standing in the frame. My absence wasn't an accident, it had been carefully planned. Then my phone rang. It was my younger brother. His voice was shaking. "Why would you embarrass our family like this?" he asked between hurried breaths. I froze. "What are you talking about?" There was a long silence. Then he whispered, "Dad just read today's newspaper." And after seeing that headline, everything at the dinner fell apart. I had spent most of my adult life accepting that, in my father's eyes, I would never be enough. My younger brother, Ethan, was the golden child, the one everyone celebrated, protected and proudly introduced at family gatherings. I was the daughter who chose a different path, left home after college and built a career in Washington, D.C. Instead of earning respect, my independence became another reason for quiet criticism. Whenever relatives asked about me, Dad would smile politely and say, "She's busy with work." He never mentioned the promotions, the long nights, or the sacrifices behind them. To him, my success was inconvenient because it didn't fit the image he wanted for our family. My brother wasn't cruel. In fact, we had always been close when we were younger. We shared birthdays, late-night conversations, and dreams about changing our lives. But as the years passed, he slowly learned that disagreeing with Dad only created more problems. It became easier for him to stay silent than to defend me. I couldn't even blame him completely. Growing up in our house meant understanding that love often came with conditions. Approval was earned by obedience, not honesty. I had stopped chasing that approval years ago. That's why Dad's text didn't make me cry. It simply confirmed what I had known for a long time, that I had already been excluded long before. I was removed from the guest list. Instead of wasting energy arguing, I poured everything into my career. I became known for solving complicated problems with patience instead of emotion. While others fought loudly to prove themselves, I learned to let results speak for me. It wasn't revenge that motivated me. It was the quiet determination to build a life no one could take away. Ironically, the very work my family dismissed was about to place my name on the front page of a national newspaper. None of them knew the announcement had been under strict confidentiality for months. By the time my father unfolded that newspaper during the engagement dinner, the story he had spent years telling everyone about me was only seconds away from collapsing. The engagement dinner wasn't the first time my father had quietly pushed me to the edge of the family picture. It was simply the first time he had done it so openly. I remembered my cousin's wedding 2 years earlier. The photographer had called for immediate family, and Dad casually waved my brother forward before turning to me with a polite smile. "Why don't you help your aunt with the guests?" he had said. By the time I returned, the photos were finished. No one mentioned that I was missing from them. Small moments like that became impossible to ignore. Whenever I visited home, conversations would stop for a second before starting again without me. My opinions were met with polite nods, then quietly replaced by whatever Dad preferred. If I suggested an idea, someone would change the subject. Minutes later, the same idea would sound brilliant when it came from someone else. Dad never raised his voice. He didn't have to. His disappointment lived in brief pauses, restrained smiles, and carefully chosen words that sounded harmless to everyone else. "Washington has changed you. You probably wouldn't understand how we do things here anymore. We know you're busy with your important career, Each sentence carried just enough kindness to avoid criticism from others, yet enough distance to remind me I no longer belonged. My brother often noticed the awkwardness. More than once I caught him opening his mouth to say something before quietly looking down at his plate instead. I could see the conflict in his eyes. But years of keeping the peace had taught him that silence was easier than confrontation. So I stopped defending myself. I arrived politely, smiled for family photos when I was included, and left before anyone could invent another reason to make me feel unwelcome. My absence gradually became expected, almost convenient. That was exactly why no one questioned Dad's message telling me to stay away from the engagement dinner. Everyone assumed I had accepted my place in the family. None of them realized that, while they were busy protecting their image, a single newspaper waiting on the dinner table was about to reveal a truth none of them had seen coming. When my brother's call ended, I didn't rush home or demand an explanation. I simply sat in my office, staring at the city lights reflecting against the windows. For the first time in years, I realized I wasn't hurt because I'd missed the engagement dinner. I was hurt because I had spent so much of my life hoping my family would one day see me differently. That hope quietly disappeared. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an old family friend who had attended the dinner. Your father found today's newspaper on the reception table. The front page featured your photograph. It announced that you had been appointed to lead a nationally recognized public integrity task force after exposing a multi-million-dollar corruption scheme. Everyone here is talking about you. I closed my eyes. The article explained months of confidential work that my team and I had completed. It described the investigation, the awards our office had received, and the reason my appointment had become national news. My family had never known because I had never spoken about projects that weren't public. I believed achievements didn't need announcements. Apparently, silence had spoken louder than I ever could. The irony settled in almost immediately. The daughter who had been excluded to avoid embarrassing the family had become the only person anyone at that dinner wanted to discuss. My father hadn't discovered a scandal. He had discovered the truth. The truth that the child he dismissed had built a life defined by integrity, instead of approval. That was the moment something changed inside me. I stopped waiting for apologies that might never come. I stopped measuring my worth against my father's opinions or my relatives' acceptance. Their invitation, or lack of one, no longer determined where I belonged. For years, I thought proving myself would finally earn their respect. Instead, I realized the greatest victory wasn't changing their minds. It was finally freeing mine. The next morning, I woke up to more than a dozen missed calls and messages from relatives who had barely spoken to me in years. Some congratulated me on the newspaper article. Others suddenly wanted to catch up. A few acted as though nothing unusual had happened the night before. I answered none of them. Instead, I followed the routine that had carried me through every difficult chapter of my life. I arrived at my office before sunrise, reviewed briefing notes for my new appointment, and met with my legal and communications teams. My role demanded discretion, and every public statement had to be accurate, professional, and carefully documented. I wasn't about to let family drama distract me from responsibilities that affected far more than my personal life. Around lunchtime, my father finally called. For the first time, he sounded uncertain. He left a voicemail saying there had been a misunderstanding about the guest list and suggested we have dinner together so the family could celebrate my success. Months earlier, I would have accepted without hesitation. Now, I listened to the message once, saved it, and returned to work. Silence wasn't punishment. It was a boundary. Over the next few days, I made one quiet decision after another. I declined interviews that focused on my personal life and spoke only about the work my team had accomplished. I updated my emergency contacts and removed family members who had long expected access to my time without offering genuine support. I also canceled plans to spend holidays at my father's house and instead accepted invitations from close friends who had stood beside me long before my name appeared in the news. There were no dramatic confrontations, no public accusations, and no emotional speeches. My response was simple. I stopped making room for people who only valued me after others did. For years, my family had treated my presence as optional. Now they would learn, quietly and without a single argument, that my absence was no longer something they could control. It was a choice I had finally made for myself. A week after the engagement dinner, my father asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, not because I wanted answers, but because I wanted closure. He was already seated when I arrived. The confident man who had once decided who belonged at his table now looked noticeably older. Folded beside his coffee cup was the same newspaper, its edges worn from being opened too many times. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said, "I made a mistake." There was no excuse this time. No mention of the guest list or family politics. Just 4 words that seemed heavier than anything else he had ever said to me. I thanked him for admitting it. Nothing more. He looked surprised, almost as if he expected anger or a list of old grievances. Instead, I simply stirred my coffee and watched people pass outside the cafe window. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was honest. A few days later, my brother came to see me in Washington. He confessed that he had argued with Dad after reading the article. For the first time in his life, he had refused to stay quiet. He apologized for all the moments he had watched me be pushed aside without speaking up. I hugged him. Some relationships deserved another chance because they were built on love, even if fear had weakened them. Others did not. Relatives who had ignored me suddenly began sending invitations to dinners, celebrations, and family photos. I politely declined everyone that felt motivated by my success rather than genuine affection. Slowly, the conversations about me changed. People no longer whispered about the daughter who had left home. They spoke about the daughter who had earned respect without demanding it. The greatest consequence wasn't that my father lost an argument. It was that he finally understood something too late. Respect cannot be withheld as punishment and expected as a reward. The seat he once denied me at his table no longer mattered, because I had already built a place where no one else's permission was required. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. There were no dramatic family confrontations or public apologies. Life simply continued. But the balance within our family had shifted in ways no one could ignore. My father stopped speaking for me. Whenever relatives asked about my work, he no longer brushed it aside with a vague answer. Instead, he admitted he didn't know everything I had accomplished. It was a small change. But after years of hearing him define my life in a few dismissive words, that honesty carried more weight than any grand speech. My brother changed too. He began calling just to talk, not because there was a problem to solve. Our conversations slowly returned to what they had been before fear and family. Expectations stood between us. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, but it was rebuilt through consistent choices rather than promises. Some relatives remained exactly the same. They praised me publicly, yet never acknowledged how easily they had accepted my exclusion. I learned not to mistake admiration for accountability. People often celebrate success because it is visible, while ignoring the quiet loneliness that came before it. Oddly enough, that realization no longer made me bitter. It made me careful. I became far more selective about who had access to my time, my home, and my peace of mind. Success had opened many doors, but experience taught me that not everyone walking through them deserved a place in my life. Looking back, I realized the engagement dinner had never truly been the biggest loss. The real loss would have been spending the rest of my life trying to earn love that depended on my usefulness or reputation. That's why this story matters. Many people spend years believing that acceptance must be won by working harder, staying quieter, or sacrificing more of themselves. But respect that disappears when you have nothing to offer was never genuine respect to begin with. My family's opinion had once defined my worth. Now it had become just another opinion. And the freedom that came with understanding that was worth far more than any invitation I had never received. Months have passed since the engagement dinner that changed everything. Life didn't become perfect, but it became peaceful. My father and I still speak from time to time. Our conversations are shorter now, stripped of old expectations and forced politeness. He no longer assumes he can decide when I belong, and I no longer seek permission to exist in his world. We are learning slowly. That respect cannot be rebuilt in a single conversation. It is earned through consistent choices. My brother and I grew closer than we had been in years. We meet whenever work allows, not because family tradition demands it, but because we genuinely enjoy each other's company. He often tells me that standing up for me also taught him how to stand up for himself. As for me, I accepted my new leadership role with gratitude and quiet determination. Every case I handle reminds me that integrity isn't measured by applause or headlines. It's measured by the decisions people make when no one is watching. Occasionally, someone asks whether I ever regretted missing that engagement dinner. I always smile. If I had been sitting at that table, I might have spent the evening trying to earn approval that was never freely given. Instead, I spent that day becoming someone whose worth no longer depended on anyone else's opinion. Looking back, I don't see that text message as the moment my father rejected me. I see it as the moment life invited me to stop rejecting myself. That was the real turning point. The newspaper article faded from public attention. Awards were eventually replaced by new headlines. Even family gossip disappeared with time. But the lesson remained. Never shrink yourself to fit into a place where your presence is treated as optional. The people who truly value you will never need your success to recognize your worth. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is not making those who hurt you feel small. It's quietly building a life so full of purpose that their rejection becomes nothing more than a forgotten chapter in your story.